So here's the thing, right? So the Tiny Pricks project is like, following the Trump presidency. Trump comes to an end. You think, oh, well, that was a bit of fun. And then, like, 2.5 years later, he starts to rear his ugly head again or something? Like, what was that all about?
Well, I guess I've never used Trump and a bit of fun in the same sentence, but I appreciate your approach to that question because I either get a sort of how could you possibly have done it? Don't you need a blood transfusion from stitching so many Trump quotes? And I appreciate that you say a bit of fun because I tried to keep it
Mm.
fun, but it really was when I finished doing the Trump era, the Trump chapter, I had some time to step away from it. And about 2 weeks ago, I went through over 5,000 pieces
Bonkers, isn't it?
from the collection. I had 12 plastic bins at my in-laws'
Mm-hmm.
house. I brought them all downstairs. I got 4 folding tables and I just started touching them. I just touched every single piece and it was incredibly intense. And this is before Biden had dropped out. And I could not believe that we were in the exact same spot we had been, maybe worse before Roe was overturned, that we were still there. Because what I realized looking back on the project and that bit of fun was that it was a kind of naive, hopeful optimism that compelled people to take up this invitation to stitch. And I know you've extended that invitation to people. And we both understand, having kind of accidentally found it, that you can apply this retroactive intentionality to stitching. But really, it kind of found me and I found it, right? We both were on the move. You're getting on a plane. I have 4 kids. I had one that played a lot of squash. I could sit into the squash courts and watch, or I could sit and make something. And so falling into it accidentally and then inviting all of these people to take their political angst, stitch something, give it to me, a stranger, forever, is a very optimistic thing. At the time, if you'd interviewed me, I would have said, and probably when we had our first exchange, it was protest. It was upset. It was anger. It was almost as if we had no choice. We were compelled to act. And now when I see all of these pieces and I see all of the time that went into them and how beautiful they are, every single, because it's starting to take its place in time in this chronology and this material record. And it's really, and I couldn't see that in the middle of it. So what it's like now is very different. And there was a period of time when it was Biden and Trump again, and it felt like the same fight, but honestly, without the same optimism, with this impending sense of doom, because I never thought he would last this long. And I don't mean he exactly. I mean the
Yeah.
movement. I mean the direction. I'm not, believe it or not, I'm focused on his language, but not him. I don't stitch pieces about his body. I don't really, I'm not into the visual of Trump, or I used to listen to all of his speeches, but I've stopped. I always have gone to the language, and the language has gotten darker and more violent, and um, and it's still here. So I think it's Masha Gessen who said, elect him once, and it's sort of this misadventure of sorts. Elect him again, and it's who we are.
Yeah. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on
Yes.
me, isn't it? It's exactly the same.
Whatever W
Yeah.
said.
But yeah, because it's fascinating. So, I mean, we're on the other side of the pond and I stare objectively
Mm,
at it. And I've had a few conversations with some people I've needle exchanged with, usually after the show, because I don't really like to get too into the politics for the people listening in the year 3822 when we're all enlightened
yeah.
beings wondering what the hell's going on. But it's just fascinating to see. I don't know how it played out, how it played out that a man who has been convicted as a criminal can still be like one side's best option for the person to run the country in his 70s. And then the other guy who's in his 80s, like the world's most powerful country, the world's most powerful CEO. And they're just like, yeah,
Mhm.
no, both of those seem really rational choices. Like from us, it's a really, And, you know, we're quite lucky now because we just got rid of a buffoon, followed by a nutbag, followed by a guy who is the wrong man in the wrong job. And now we've got some like adults at the helm of the country, which is a fascinating thing to have happened for like after 14 years. But it's just bewildering that the structure of politics in America can make it so that you can be found to be a criminal and that doesn't somehow preclude you from running the country. You know, all of these structures, it's just bizarre to watch from the sidelines.
Yes, and I'm an American citizen, but I'm a permanent resident of Canada. So I grew up in Canada and I now reside in Canada, though the project keeps me back in the US most of, it's a good period of time. So the Canadians also have, I mean, we have Trudeau. So it's a very different optic and a very different person. There are people who can be unhappy, but they're not. I would say that what we're seeing in the US is a failure of systems. So it's one thing to say that somebody who's convicted of a crime, how could they go on? But the question I always think about is how is the system failing? What does that say? So you lose faith. I think a lot of my work is about trying to sustain something material, literally, but trying to have something of sustenance in front of you that you can say this exists. Because systems, it feels like systems are breaking down. Systems are meant to protect people, help us get along, help us agree. You know, and it just that's hard. So, I may be sort of building a fabric wall against this sort of huge wave that sometimes feels like it's crashing down. It's a time to look at all these things, and I know that we are, and we have this moment now where we have so many dramatic things happening. And I think that head spinning, you have one person in the race, the next day you have another person. You raise millions of dollars, which in our system you kind of have to do. Drag this on, it's so expensive. And you have this pent up need and desire for joy. And you can track all that with our work that we're both doing. I mean, you're really sort of creating this timeline by seeing what people make. And so we have this great capacity for joy also. I have seen some of the most amazing things through the Trump era and through this project, which exists because of this challenging political period.
Yeah, and it must be, like you say, to arrange all the pieces and see it stimulate so much emotion. I mean, I wonder whether you start to see recurring themes, or whether, I don't know whether did you arrange them chronologically, or is that just too much of a head spinner?
So I had a lot of different things happening. First of all, I should say that I do this project on my own. So I could have an archivist, I could have an intern. But I'm going so fast trying to keep up with the news and create this record that I haven't had a lot of time to look at it conceptually and step back. But what I did is I just emptied every bin and I just started to sort them, and you start to see patterns. So you sort some pieces by names, and I mean, we're going back to Alexander Vindman, we're going back to Megyn Kelly, we're going back to all these different people that are mentioned by name, and then that was too overwhelming, so I went by themes because themes emerge. So the greatest number of pieces sort of reflect a kind of, it's not a poll exactly, but it tells you which quotes people felt the most compelled to stitch, and whatever that tells you, you even have a better answer than I do. But grab them by the pussy, build a wall. There are quotes that just come forward, and there are issues that come forward because they matter to people. And so the largest piles were quotes about women, immigration, climate, and COVID. And all different pieces. So those were the pieces that compelled people to stitch things, and quotes from all different sources. And I should be very clear that anyone can participate in Tiny Perks Project. It doesn't matter what your politics are. It just so happens that I don't know that I've had a lot of Trump supporters participate, but they certainly could. The rules were pretty, or the guidelines really were designed to invite anyone to join.
But it's like you've got one of those, you know, like word clouds where they see the big phrases. You know, you've got a very like you've got this amazing infographic that's been handmade and crowdsourced by people that you can probably pull apart and put back together in all these different ways. But yeah, it occurs to me that people take the time to stitch things that have importance to them. So if you're getting a lot of those kind of like, you know, anti-feminine statements being made or ones to do with climate or whatever, you know, that's a clear, the word cloud's strong, isn't it? Those are resonating with the people who want to put those pieces of work forward. So it's a great mood reflector, something like that. I think it's kind of, I don't know if it's unique to the nature of embroidery and needlework to do that, but I mean, one of the other thoughts I had is that each of those pieces is someone standing up and going, no, this isn't true. It's almost like there's just a collection of like truth beacons or something. Do you know what I mean? People just going, this is wrong, this is gone, we are being mass lighted, which I think is when they try and gaslight a lot of people or something.
Well, I was going to say it's interesting because as you say that inside of my head, I was thinking, no, but people also stitch words they love. But the truth is they don't. They're not as compelled. And it does remove traditionally embroidery from this kind of optimistic, like home is where the heart is sort of message. You know, I didn't get a lot of Biden quotes. I didn't have people messaging me asking if they could submit Biden quotes. The Biden quote that resonated the most for people in my project was when he spoke about his son, about Hunter's addiction.
Yeah.
I love my son. My son has a problem. It transcended the moment and it just showed you who he was. There are a lot of other things you might feel, but in that case, a lot of people reacted to that piece. So I should explain that I went from a period when the project was, first it was private, it was just me. And I needed a lot of help because I started just doing one. I did one. 2018. I didn't even touch Trump for 2 years. I was doing other projects. I did one. I posted it. My 50 followers liked it. I was like, oh, this could scratch an itch. So Trump won't last very long. Every week I'll stitch a quote of his. And at the end, I'll have a funny little exhibit of maybe 100 pieces. And we'll say, oh my gosh, you know, yes, that happened. You know, I could not have imagined this, but I couldn't keep up. And the more I started grabbing these quotes, like just pulling them off of Twitter, I thought this one has to be there. This one has to be there. And then they start to speak to each other. And then you think, well, this one would be missing if I didn't do this one. You know, I have huge financials, you know, and it just goes on. And then a friend said, oh, would you like some help? Why don't I organize a workshop? And I don't even know if we called it a workshop. It's probably just like get together. And there were 6 or 7 women. And this is around the time of the Megyn Kelly quote, or people were talking about it again. And this group of women sat around talking about sort of sexual harassment in the workplace and what they'd experienced. And they stitched a piece. And then I saw that it was much better public. It was much better. It wasn't about me posting something that people would react to. It was about people seeing, looking at the language with intention, looking for a piece to stitch. And you search differently. It's like research almost. And you're thinking about it differently instead of just swipe.
Yeah.
So I feel like it belonged in the public. And now that, but then I had to end it somehow because it got so big.
Yeah.
I mean, I would get 10 to 20 packages a day at one point.
I've had that situation, just to interject. Have you ever had to go to the postman and go, no, this is like an art project. I'm not like into drug dealing or anything. This is all like legit because there's so many like padded envelopes coming through.
Well, it was, I have to say, it infused me with a real kind of nostalgia, which was fitting with the material, not the text, but to get packages in the mail. Is this really gives you a warm feeling. And people would send me notes and send me textiles. And it was strange to get so much mail, but I loved it because it was an additional effort. I can send you an email very quickly, but if I send you a letter, there are these other steps involved. And I think it sort of drew me closer to participants. I mean, some of the letters were really moving, and some people sent me, statements, and some people explained why they didn't want their names released with with the post. There's just so much going on and so much information. So once it became, but it had to end, and it did. I said, when he's out of office, it'll end.
And he won't be back. There'll be no chance of that. I get a real break from this.
Right. And then there was the insurrection, and so that actually needed some time to process. And so since then, it's remained positive and negative. The pieces have been just started tracking all sorts of different things. And then I went back to poetry and writers and things I loved. And now it's back to the current election for the next 95 days.
Although I saw you posted Simone Biles' quote the other day.
I just did one 10 minutes ago. Yes. Some of the... So, I mean, okay, I can't resist some. I mean, she said, she tweeted, I guess, I love my black job. And so now I'm sure it's the same way for you. Your hands have to catch up to your vision, because I can see that piece stitched. So then I have like quickly, map it out, put the hoop on, thread the needle, and try to get it out, and just as quickly as I can.
Can you remember? Can you remember what it was about the phrase "I am a stable genius" that got you so agitated that it activated the whole thing?
I'm a very stable genius.
That was the first one you did, right?
No, it's the first one I did. I think because at some point in my life, I always thought it was great to be a genius. Everyone wanted to be a genius. But then I realized that there were a lot of challenges in being a genius. I'd read Andrew Solomon's book, Far from the Tree, where he talks about differences, and that being a genius is being extremely gifted is very challenging. And so I thought about it and that's why I think he qualified stable.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Where there are a lot of, there can be evil genius as well. And it just struck me as one of those statements that could be read in a lot of different ways. There's a way in which he is doing something that no one else has been able to do before. So there's brilliance is the wrong word, but there's something he knows how to do. And so that's self-aware to me in a way. But to say yourself that you're a very stable genius was just enough that I could stitch it, and I could see how long it would take. And I was very shy about overcommitting. But it just summed up absolutely everything that he was saying, everything that he's about, and what he imagines his appeal to be, which is to be very smart. Or you could substitute powerful, wealthy, all these different things, which says something about our values, that he thought that was what would really, not I'm a kind person, I'm a good person, but I'm a very stable genius. So it just worked.
It sounds sometimes like the sort of thing a 5-year-old boy would say. It's one of those, isn't it?
Yes.
Like, I am the greatest long jumper ever, having like jumped about 1.5 feet or whatever. Yeah.
Yes. And it has that, it doesn't make any sense, but it is so bold, and it is exactly what he thinks. That is true. So in this sense, it is the truth of what he thinks. So that was the first one. I can't remember the second one. It was the early days. There were a lot about Ivanka and his daughter, but it also sort of important to realize that even then we were not, there's so much more information now, even that to catch phrases, I was and am interested in what we can remember. And how much this process can help us remember the things that are said. And I can tell now, having stitched thousands of pieces, that it's hard to remember. I thought that the hands and the work would help with, remembering, because I realized that we don't have, Trump probably won't have a presidential library, all this documentation. We don't own our social media accounts. I don't own my Instagram account. It's not mine. So trying to create something physical, and there are a lot of people who've asked me whether or not there's a physical collection. They sort of, like, they see it on Instagram and it's like, oh yes, there's a post, but to see the pieces in person is very different.
It's in the orangery. So
Yeah,
you've just got them arranged every day. You just build another wall and add a few more.
Yeah, but it's interesting to think about, because on the phone everything looks the same. We put it in the same box, and these textiles are all different sizes, weight. They have a real life to them when you see them in person.
Do you recollect when, after you'd stitched that first one, did it feel like you'd scratched an itch? Was there a bit of a sense of relief? Obviously, you then continued, so you were aware of its power as a sort of therapeutic tool, which undeniably all of these are. I think that's why people do it. But I just wonder, upon reflection, whether and each time you do it, does it now feel like not so much scratching an itch as maybe squeezing a spot or something, because you've done so many of them? But is there a sense of relief? Do you feel like I've overcome something through the process of making that quote?
I think that I felt uncomfortable having Trump as a president, for me personally, and I know it's different for different people. So I'll just sort of, maybe I can speak in more general terms, to find yourself in a position where you're inactive and you feel compelled to somehow be active. It might be something that happens at your child's school. It might be something that happens in the workplace, wherever you are, to see something and feel that your character is called upon to respond in some way, and not to be able to is not a good feeling. So what I did feel is that on my terms, I was responding to the Trump presidency. I was responding to this political moment. And that's become very hard. I will confess to you that impulse now feels different. So there isn't the same satisfaction or squeezing or scratching, these bodily kind of, movements that you were describing as feeling, so much as I'm trying to find the spaces where I can be truthful to who I am, and truthful to what I know and what I don't know. So there are a lot of conflicts and issues that I'm now called upon, or people suggest that I should, by comment on, I mean make a piece, which is really now sort of commentary. And I don't feel I have the skills to do that at this time, and I still feel, sometimes I feel a little bit between being the artist and being, I'm very clear with people, I'm not a journalist, I'm not a pundit, but once you are known for what you do, then you also respond to what you do. So I think that the answer is, now it feels more like I'm catching raindrops, and I am trying to grab these different quotes that will help people and help me sort of process this moment. And I guess the example I would give you, an itch, or what I'm trying to catch right now, are Harris quotes.
Right.
Because I'm very interested in her, and I'm interested in the language to see if it's changed, to see how it's different from Biden and from other candidates. And I don't know yet until I stitch, 100 pieces, and I sort of see, well, what is she saying? How is she reacting to things? What are the sound bites? Because generally, I'm at this point stitching sound bites. For a long time, I was stitching. I have very long pieces about all different Trump issues and different quotes about his relationship with China and Russia. And I went into sort of documentation of things, and some pieces are very long and labor intensive. And now most pieces are shorter. So I can sort of bring a lot more voices into this space, like Simone Biles. I mean, how can you resist? So that makes me happy. That gives me some joy. So now it's a different feeling. It's once it's solidified and it's an actual project that has its own history.
But that's the,
I
I mean, because
I'm relating to
yeah, sorry, it's curious to me because it started out as something that was just very personal, and then it became a sort of personal thing that people contributed to. But at somewhere there must have been a tipping point where suddenly you were like, this thing's got like significance. And in the same way as the Bayeux tapestry is used to capture a moment in history through textiles, you've kind of created a crowdsourced version of that, which comes then with its own gravity and its own responsibility. And I guess what I'm hearing you say is that now you feel that there's a duty to make that about as well formed as is possible. So you can't just nonchalantly stitch something that catches your eye, because now you've got to place it within this context of how it fits and how it adds to the chronology that perhaps you're presenting.
Yes, and this is a question I sort of have for you too, which is that I sometimes wonder, am I doing the same thing over and over again? I mean, artists generally move from one kinds of topic to another. They exhaust one medium. They can't, do the same kind of work anymore. They've made the last one, unless a, incredible opportunity arises, they're not going to make another one of those. And I don't know where I fit because my technique is not advanced in any particular way. I haven't changed my medium. I am still just right here in this community, sort of, swimming around. But I am aware that, I don't know, gratitude is the right word, but I'm aware that I'm in this with a group of people, and we may agree or disagree, but I feel very lucky to be able to share some of the things that I'm thinking about. So this sort of moves us into sort of a conversation about social media and how it's used, because my work exists because of this sort of hybrid. I don't know if it's hybrid interaction anymore, but the making, going from a quote, from a tweet, something on social media, to a physical textile, and then back onto social media. And so I haven't exhausted that path yet. But do you find that, have you reached a point in certain projects that you've been doing where you thought this is enough? Or have there been projects that sort of have continued more or less in the same way, but the meaning keeps evolving?
I think it's very kind of you to ask. It's interesting because a lot of the crowdsourced projects I've done have usually come with a deadline. So, whether it's like a project at the with the National Trust where I did a tree and they had cross-stitch baubles on them, that had a delivery date. So they were quite deliberate. And so there's a certain finiteness to that, and you can get a sense of closure. But then sometimes if I think about the overarching things that I do, and I sit there and I think, well, I'm not an artist, and because I don't have the time to put in to bare my soul through a creative means like that. But I recognize that I'm a curator and I'm a sort of a conversation haver. That word? So it's almost like I feel like sometimes things evolve, and one thing I've become quite aware of is how well things fit within me. So, for instance, doing the podcast is something that I feel a really good fit for. When I started doing it, I was like, yeah, this is like the right energy feeling inside my body, because it's something that's the natural evolution of where I've come from. And I feel like in your situation, I don't think you're finished with this project yet, because if there were, I feel like you would start to get an inkling around the back of your head of what the next step was. It's kind of weird. Recently, our dog passed away, died, and I was able to come up with a cross stitch idea for the first time in ages. We've now got a puppy. It's not that I don't have that idea anymore. I definitely don't have the time for it. But I was very interested to see how that feeling kind of crept around the back of my head of a new idea and just kind of moseys up. And I feel like that's usually the surest sign that you're getting to a point where you are ready to change. Whereas it feels to me from what you've said, you've just got all those pieces back out and laid them out on a table and had a look at them. And it's almost like you're reprising the whole situation. but it doesn't feel like you're done yet. And the story isn't done yet, you know. Maybe when he pops his clogs and eventually goes back to whichever planet or sphere of existence he came from in the first place, maybe that'll be the point when you can go, right, I can offer this up as a historical record, and then you can go off and do something completely different. But if the inkling's not there, I'm guessing that's because you're not done yet. Does that seem?
I think sometimes I wonder if I'm trying to. Yeah, that all resonates. And I'm sorry about
No,
your
that's all right.
dog.
It's all right. It's all right. He's a good boy.
We lost our dog of 13 years, and people had lost dogs before. My friends have lost dogs and stuff. I was like, why is a dog? But now I totally get it. And we got a puppy, so I feel you.
Yeah.
You're kind of like,
We'll do a whole another episode about what it's like to have a puppy that just chews everything.
Yeah, and why do we think that when we get a puppy, we're just gonna get the mature dog that we had before, sort of right away?
Honestly.
What is that amnesia? It's like childbirth. Yeah, you know what? As you're talking, and it's so nice to hear you talk about your work too, because I thought I was imposing a deadline. I did think, I had a deadline when he's out of office. I think what I kept doing is stitching all of these different quotes, and a lot of them what I'd call the balm for the bombastic, so the positive quotes, because maybe it's a counterbalance. Maybe when I have as many positive pieces or hopeful or alternative pieces to that, the weight, I don't just mean the physical weight of what I went through, sorted through 3 weeks ago, but the weight, I think about one of the things I like about Harris is how many younger voters have registered. I mean, I'm 55. I want my kids to vote. I want my kids, and my youngest is now of voting age. This will be his first election. But for two of my other kids, these have been their choices have been, dominated by this particular, not just Trump, but the Trump, this kind of these kinds of politics. So maybe then when there's something to counterbalance, maybe when I feel like I've found all of that other language.
I mean, that's usually what I just find is like that. Like when the idea comes to you, it's because you're ready to get the idea without wishing to sound too namaste about it. But at the same time, like every single conversation I've ever had with someone, it's always like the ideas come when you're ready. And it might be that you'll just hear a song lyric that will stick in the back of your head for a while, in the same way as someone going, I'm a stable genius was enough to rile you, whatever the creative path is. But I think that in the same way as I started out doing cross stitch, because I thought it was funny, and then I kind of did a lot of the tropes of like sweary cross stitch and the novelty of being a man, and then found myself in a position of curation. I feel like your path has pretty much been exactly the same thing, because you started out doing your little thing, and here you are now curating exhibitions, and we haven't even got talking about the book, which we are going to get talking about. But it's that same kind of path, and sometimes it's just like you're on this raft and there's a river that's taking you somewhere, and you just have to, if you're lucky enough, you can tell you're on a raft in the first place. But like with me, I don't know whether I'm insecure because I see so many amazing textile artists that I don't feel like there's any point in competing. But at the same time, I just think, well, actually, my strengths more often than not are having conversations like this. That's the thing that I'm good at. And so maybe it turns out that this is the place where I'm meant to be in the scheme of things. I'm meant to be the dispel people's preconceptions about needlework guy or something, But it's just, I think then, like with me, like doing the podcast, the idea came along. I'm currently involved in some projects in my hometown as well, looking to see whether we can create an art gallery and re-stimulate the cultural conversation there. And that's another one of those things. It's just about those kind of movements. You find yourself being around the edges of the scene rather than being people putting stuff into the middle of the scene. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. It does. I will say that what you're doing is a lot of work. I know, you're doing research. Your invitation to participate really included, as an artist, addressed every anxiety or concern I might have. And I don't just mean the technical anxieties, but what it means to share your work And I think you said something like, my job is to make you shine. And that is more, I think you and I, we use the word curate, but I think what we're also talking about is how can we help people feel better? And I've had people who say that, this project got me through the last, X years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever it's going to be. And I don't really think that means I did. I think this process, this whole idea that we can be together and appreciate this seemingly, it's not mundane at all, but as we're talking about, I'm not spending hours and days on a piece. I can't do that. And so I always think of it as what is the time investment and how does that mean the skill set? And I love looking at work that people have spent more time making, but I can't do that. But I know that I'm eager to have a conversation and give people things sort of immediately. And so the trade-off is, and when you're doing actual interaction in your community, then you really are focusing on the in-person, on the interaction, and what comes out of it is, it comes out of it. I remember I was very interested in art therapy originally, and I remember when I learned that to be an art therapist, you were practicing your art in parallel with other people. You weren't teaching them as an artist. And I think when you take an art course, you go to your art teacher to expect them to teach you something. And I'm just doing my embroidery right beside you. I mean, I might know some things, I might show here's a few shortcuts, but we're really on a parallel path. And I've felt that way when the project was public. I would give workshops to spend time with people and to assure them that, this is not that hard. That's what I'm saying. I think that's a different message than this is challenging and I alone can do it. I've never said those words. That is probably a good segue to my book, because that is true. I do believe that the work I do, is, and I don't know if that's the difference between craft and art, but I just say to people, how do you do it? And I just said, that's how I spent my time. That's what I chose to do with my time. And you could do that too. But you choose, you're choosing to do something else, which is fine, of course. But it is possible to do what I do.
It reminded me of a quote I heard on a podcast recently. There's a guy called George Mack, and he talks about the illusion of adults and how when you're a child, you look at adults and you think that like they know what's going on because they're adults. And then you become an adult and you realize that no adult actually knows what's going on. We're all just doing the best we can and hanging on in there. And it's just like there's this illusion, like the perfect horse. There's just this illusion of an adult as someone who's really got their act together. And it's the same thing. But I think, a part of that release is as you said, it's not going, I'm better than you. Like if I'm ever teaching or trying to facilitate, all I'm doing is going, I've done this, I've yet to be struck by lightning, it's really good for you, why don't you try it? Not I'm so much better than you because I'm clearly outclassed by a lot of the people I know. But I think you're right, and I think that's almost like the ideal teaching perspective, is to have that humility, to just go, we're all in this together. And I wanted to ask you, this might make sense, but I wanted to ask you if you can remember the first piece you got from somebody else.
Okay, wait a minute. I think so. We haven't talked about it, but I had a project before Tiny Pricks Project.
Okay.
And that's Interwoven Stories. And that is also still a public project. There are over 400 what look like fabric 3-hole lined pages. And I did this project through the Arts Council of Princeton as an artist in residency, and people are invited to take this fabric piece of notebook paper and stitch into it a response to a kind of cultural mapping prompt. So what is your sense of memory of a place? What makes a place memorable? How does place impact identity? And we did it in Princeton, New Jersey, in the community. And people would stitch about their favorite walk. They would stitch about a community garden. They would stitch about the local mayor whom they admired. They would stitch about all the different memories they had. And those pages were the first pieces that were given back to me in a public project. And I don't remember the first page, but what I remember was the feeling. And this is going to sound a little crazy, but you know when someone has a baby and they say to you, "Do you want to hold the
And
baby?"
you go,
And you, and you and you hold their baby and you think, how can it be that I'm holding this baby that's so specific to this other person, so amazing, and they trust me to hold it? So I remember the feeling of getting the pieces, and that feeling has never stopped. You know, that feeling has remained throughout this whole project, to have somebody give me something. So maybe they're all first. I mean, I have this feeling of it never is never gotten old to me. Interwoven Stories is 400 pages. I just installed some at a store in Nantucket, Crisps, and I was looking at these pages again, and people talking about taking the ferry, about sunsets, about walks with their dogs. Very beautiful. So I have a feeling about the firsts, and I've retained that feeling of sort of real. It's a real honor to hold this work for so many people.
Yeah, definitely. Can I read you a quote?
Yes.
Okay, bear with me. Inspiration comes to me in one of two ways: a slowly building wave, or as a sudden prick. The former is an amalgamation of memory objects, emotions, experiences, outside influences, books I'm reading, places, photographs, events, time in nature, and former selves. It gathers momentum until it has enough energy to peak. The latter comes as a flash almost out of nowhere. It is sharp and impulsive. I know exactly what to do and how to do it. I can see it before it exists. Either way, once inspiration calls, it must be answered. Discuss.
Discuss. Do you want the slow building answer, or do you want the prick answer? Well, so we discussed already in the podcast that the prick, the kind of uh, the Simone Biles quote. I didn't go looking for this quote. And I guess I should say there's always a call and response. So I listened to Trump's interview, in which he said, these immigrants are coming and taking black jobs. And I was like, oh, I don't want to stitch his words. I don't want to stitch that. But the prick was, so that feeling was there. When I was scrolling and I saw this, just happened to pick up my phone before getting ready for my interview with you. I saw her post. It was immediate. I love my black job. It's just so brilliant that I could see it. It was just quickly getting it out. That's a tiny prick. The other slow building is an issue that I have not figured out how to address or how to talk about. So I've done a lot of pieces since October 7th about children. And I think about those pieces a lot. I think about what I'm saying. I think about how to get to the point to stitch, what to stitch. It's been a very complicated place to be on social media. It's not about me, but it has been, I have felt that I've let people down who've expected certain things from me in terms of my politics and what I would stitch and what I would say and taking a stance and what I would report on. So the very slow building is, I want to say something. I want to stitch something. I'm looking for the right words. And, I was just going to pull it up and find I did a James Baldwin piece, and that really, for me, was such a slow build. So yes, that piece didn't take me a long time to stitch, but I thought about stitching a piece, how to address the images of children suffering, how to say something that's just not going to add fuel to a fire, but is not also turning my back and walking away. And so this is the James Baldwin piece. The children are always ours, every single one of them, all over the globe. And I'm beginning to suspect that whoever is incapable of recognizing this may be incapable of morality. So that's not like a sudden prick. That's not that is a feeling. And I don't know, did I figure it out, or was that the right quote? I think it is. I stand by that quote. And that's the slow building. And so that comes from, a lot of different places that I have come from. And I have 4 children. So I think about children. They're adults now, young adults. But I think about that and care. And it's just a slow build. It just comes out of a different place.
Is it like notes of a
Then,
chord where eventually the notes
yes,
come together in the right configuration and you go, oh, there it is. Like there's the note.
yes. And it's funny you say notes because I know you talk about music, and I was thinking about, you know, there are just times when I'm stitching a piece and songs, I don't have necessarily a favorite album, but songs just come right into my head as I'm stitching, you know. And so when Harris said, like, say it to my face, all I could hear was Lady Gaga's Poker Face. Like, it just kind of, you know, hands over my ears. So in that case, yeah, the music, it does actually prompt music sometimes. And so I do post pieces with
Because
songs.
you studied creative writing, didn't you? So what's
Mhm.
interesting, I guess, is, you know, what you're talking about there is the process of, is it seeking creative writing? Is it finding the right words to say, except your decision is to use the words of other people? Is that something you're able to
Yes.
like pick up on through your own study?
It makes me so happy to quote writers and artists, because I remember during the Trump presidency, I had a friend whose book was coming out, and I asked him if he was going on tour, and he said, "You know, I just I can't get coverage. Trump dominates." And then I flew back home to Victoria, BC, and I picked up the local paper there, and there was a piece on Trump, and I thought, right, it's all there's only a certain amount of space. So if you have a book coming out, you're competing, you know, and everyone with Trump. You were competing with Trump for space. And so I thought, the minute I can start stitching words by writers and journalists and musicians and other people, I am going to, because if I am seeking some sort of relief, then surely other people are. And as a creative writing major, I have a love of writers. And so I've messaged so many of them and said, can I stitch a quote of yours? Sometimes I do without asking, but I, you know, short, and I include the attribution. But I just think anything to bring good words into this space. I mean, surely if I'm offering, you know, thousands of Trump quotes, I can offer something else to go with that to help, because I think that's where we are now, is this balance. You're addressing something, so if you're addressing it, you know, you can't, the remediation can't be only out of fear.
Yeah, it's like, as I said earlier, it feels like a lot of the statements that are made are because people are going, this doesn't resonate with me as a being who is loving and caring. And so there's almost like, what do they say? You know, the stories are like, oh, the sky used to always be dark. You know, I can't remember whether it's a sci-fi thing or something. And they're like, the darkness isn't winning because look how many tiny pricks of light there are, or whatever. Tiny pricks. There you go. It probably is along those kind of lines, isn't it? It's just like that, maybe there a tide will turn. You know, it's been interesting talking to some of my more politically aware friends over here, how nice it is to hear about the optimistic ideas that are coming out of the government, and what a sense of relief there is to think that maybe things could get better. And you wonder whether that is, maybe there is a turning point, maybe one of the reasons where this desire to share the love more obviously is coming from, is because there's a sense of that. I mean, the sense of relief between this point in time now and say 2 weeks ago must be kind of incredible, because I feel like 2 weeks ago some guy may or may not have nearly got shot in the ear or whatever, and it felt like, oh my god, it's over. And now it's just a whole nother kettle of fish. I mean, maybe, I don't know whether you feel that influences the tales you want to be pulling out and resonating with, whether there's a difference.
I felt when the assassination attempt occurred, I had a hard time with people making jokes about it. And I had a hard time seeing the image of Trump pumping his fists in the air with blood across his face. And again, not to go back to, you know, being a parent, but an assassination, and you know, jokes about like people, I know the assassin missing. I don't want to see Trump assassinated. I don't want to see anybody shot, period. I don't want guns around. I don't want that language. And I just thought about, had he been assassinated, think of how that would feel to, kids going back to school, doing active shooter drills in their schools. I mean, this is not, I wanted to see, Biden and Trump appear on a stage together and say, you know what? This is not us. It doesn't matter who this very unwell person was. It's just not us. So yeah, I didn't know how to quite address that, but I was sitting with it for a little while. And then, of course, there was the debate, or the debate was things happened quickly. And then when Harris stepped in, it was an interesting moment to see how people reacted and to allow yourself to feel joy. And I did not know how happy I would feel to see a woman on the stage again, this national stage, to see. And I thought, I don't want to model for my kids unhappiness with politics for, another decade. I, want to feel this moment. Isn't it exciting? And, Mary Oliver said, joy is not meant to be a crumb. Allow yourself this moment. And then I realized, well, you know what? People immediately there's some joy. And then they start thinking, oh, but she did this, but this, but this. And I thought, there's no perfect candidate out there. And I'd have people who would message me privately and say, I love your work. People always seem to, they qualify. I love your work. I always know someone says, I love your work. Here it comes. And I'm definitely there for it. I love feedback. As long as you're kind. I don't want to be told mean things, which I have been. But they'll say, I'm stuck on Harris. Like, I'm stuck with her record or this or that. And I just say to them, or her policy relative to Gaza, and people say to me, I can't vote for her. I can't after what I've seen. And I say, there are two choices. I just see two choices. Let's just let's just go with the better choice. I think the better choice, and then go from there. The work doesn't stop. Just like I thought my project was going to be over when Trump was out of office, forgetting that there was a world he created or was there created for him. I don't know which. It's naive to think that we stop this work. And so the work now is to say, there's an election. It's very simple. It's not a third party candidate. We don't have that here. There are two choices. And then what do you do after you have the better choice? Hopefully it goes smoothly. Hopefully it's not drawn out. Hopefully it's not violent. Can we be grateful for that? Because what the assassination attempt suggested is that this is a violent sort of, this is a violent situation.
Yeah.
So that's not a good feeling. So I'm I did a piece of something that is a Rebecca Solnit quote, which is, voting is not a Valentine. It's a chess match. It's a chess move. Just vote and then do the work that you want to do or that you want to see happen.
I thought the minute that Beyonce went, oh yes, you can use my music, I was like, okay, we're on. This is a good move. I did want.
Oh, we're on. Yeah. That I mean, we're on. That is on, and that has been fun because I've had to rely on. So I think a lot about the next generation, whether it's your own children or other people's children or young adults, but this is really about the future. And it so quickly got out of my hands that I would have to go to my kids and say, like, explain the coconut, explain this. Is Brat, explain this to me?
Yeah.
And a lot of people in my account were also like, I don't quite understand. And I was like, I know. But how exciting.
Yeah.
That I don't know. Because as you were talking earlier about becoming an adult and realizing that you don't know things, I realized I didn't know things when my kids started to tell me that I didn't know
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, definitely, isn't it? Yeah, there's a couple of podcasts I listen to that explain that one, so I can. I mean, my kids are 5 and 7, so they're not my point of reference. But as an aside, like
Yeah.
there's this issue that's come up about like trans people boxing, and we're definitely not going to get into that debate. But I've got a couple of people who I just ask their questions. I go, imagine I'm like a middle-aged old man who doesn't have a clue. What should I be thinking about this? What is the enlightened direction that I should be applying to this? And I'm very grateful for those perspectives because it moves so fast. I wanted to ask you as well about. Instagram's been quite integral to the growth of the project and the success of the project, and yet there's a lot of opinions put forth within the comment section of many of your pieces, and I wondered how you felt about that, how you've evolved and presumably developed your own resilience in that respect.
So first of all, I could not do what I'm doing without social media. So just to be, I think clear and somewhat transparent, social media has allowed me to do this work because I had been parenting and I live quite far away from the place where the things that are happening, that I'm covering. I didn't have an agent. I didn't have a gallery. Social media gave me an opportunity. It levels the playing field in a lot of ways that I really appreciate. And I really appreciate being able to be contacted and have people contact me. A lot of the contributors to my book have come through Instagram relationships. And it's a way, it's not speed dating or something, but we like each other's work. And that's a really nice thing. I am very grateful for this opportunity. I also had a situation in which my Instagram account disappeared for over 24 hours. It was gone. And I had a moment of trying to figure out what that meant, what I was going to do about it. And when it first disappeared, I called my husband and I said, this was quite a while ago, but still, I said, call Instagram. And he's like, you don't call Instagram. 800 number to call. And it was one of the most important nights of my professional life when it disappeared. It was the opening of the show in 2019 at Lingua Franca. And the New Yorker was covering it, and the Resistance Survival Chorus had sang, and I just reached 10,000 followers. And I went to check my phone after the opening, and my account was gone. It was like I had been erased. And all the comments, all the people, I mean, at that point, the project was about 600 pieces. And I went to bed that night, eventually at 3 a.m. But before I went to bed, I thought, would I like to have the physical collection be, burn or disappear, be gone, or this other digital collection? Which two things matter? And what I missed, I realized I could rebuild it and it was restored, but I would never be able to, I would have to recreate that community. And how would people find me again? And how would I find them? And so what I realized about social media is that it's an incredible community. And I'm very grateful for that. But I also feel some responsibility, not for my own safety, but for the safety of others. So if you comment on a post, what I find most challenging is, and somebody posts something, offensive or difficult or attacks you, is it my responsibility to manage this? That's something I've struggled with because I want people to feel safe or at least to have an interesting, safe discussion. I don't want people to attack each other. So I can tell when they're trolls. I can tell when they're bots. I can tell sort of generally what somebody's intention is, and I can tell when they start to attack comments after certain posts. I can tell. I won't use a hashtag NRA because I'll just attract people who not really there for the embroidery, shall we say.
Yeah.
Didn't come for the embroidery, come for the embroidery and stay for the conversation. So I've learned to treat it a little bit like a community workspace, the way you would if you were giving a workshop. And then I also have had to learn to let go of it because I cannot spend my time managing all of it. And fair enough, people do expect you to keep your community safe. They do expect you to maintain some integrity. There's the post, that's your work. And then everything kind of follows it.
Mm.
And you're a little bit responsible for its, what happens in the gallery.
Mm.
But this is a really big gallery and you have no bouncers and
Yeah.
But I do feel some responsibility. And the other thing I learned about social media is I can block people. I'm not an elected, official. I can block people. And believe it or not, it was hard for me to do that because free speech.
Mm.
And I was, no. And that took me a little while to figure out.
Mm.
No, this is my account, actually, even it's Meta's really, but this is my content. And I have some control over that. So a lot of it was figuring out what happened after I post. What does this community mean to me? What is the value of it? What is my responsibility and what is not my responsibility?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I wonder whether if you had the resource, whether there's a correlation between the topics that people have stitched the most and the topics that people have commented on the images of the most. It wouldn't surprise me if you could draw some parallels. It feels like that would be a naturally occurring phenomenon.
Exactly. And that's what was lost when the account disappeared briefly, because each of those comments is also its own kind of record. So when, with my work, and I think a lot of artwork, it can really be a ripple. And this is just a stone that's dropped. And how that ripple moves over the surface has a lot to do with the surface and all these different conditions. So how do people respond? It's not what you would think. What I will say, though, is that people have become much faster at trolling you and attacking issues. I have, over the last 6 years, just seen how the behavior has changed and how social media, Instagram has become more professional, quote unquote professional. People are posting differently. It's shifted. And so I think there are more guardrails, but it's not a place for your 5 and 7-year-olds. I mean, it's just not a place. They're not enough yet. We don't know enough about the formality. A gallery has all these different rules and structures to it, and this gallery doesn't have all of those yet.
And yours is a gallery with what? Nearly 120,000 people looking at it, or potentially looking at it as well. This
Potentially.
is no small beans. Yeah. Then it turns out it's about 12,000 in the end.
Those numbers are not real. There are 120,000, but however, 30,000 of them see each. I mean, we're not even going to talk about algorithms. So that's why it's so nice that was also why it was so interesting to work. I mean, the book came together very quickly, and working on the book, the book came out of Instagram, really, even though it's a physical book. So it's really nice I haven't seen the final book yet, but I can't wait. I love books. I love objects. So, but it was really interesting to take content and then from, really, in a way, social media, because it's a small book. It's somewhere between a very long book and then a post, because it's physically small, but it has this hand, it's sort of 1-to-1 ratio with your hand. You're holding it in your hands. It's a small book with messages from many different people. So
I'm going to formally introduce the book now, because that quote that I quoted earlier is a direct quote from the book. The book is called Crafting a Better World: Inspiration and DIY Projects for Craftivists by Diana Weymar. Is it Weymar or Weimar or?
It's Weimar.
Weimar. See, right down to edit that bit as well.
It's okay.
By Diana Weymar, creator of the Tiny Bricks Project. Get there in the end. So I was able to have a look at a review copy of the book, as it were, and I liked it, obviously. Now, what struck me about it actually is, in the same way as the Tiny Pix project is very much like your input, but very ably supported by the views and wisdom of other people, then so it comes with the book, because the book is essentially a collection of, 25 different people, their inputs, their ideas, and then you're holding their hands and kind of bringing that together.
I think I picked people who've held my hands. I think I felt like this was when I was asked to do a book on craftivism. I just thought of community. I just thought of who's making something, whether it's a song or it's stained glass windows or it's a cookie or it's chocolate. Craftivism to me is just this creating a connection. And I wanted to make it open and to present many different approaches, because I feel like we can find out how to do a lot of things technically on YouTube or on TikTok or wherever we go. We have so much information. We cleaned a grill yesterday. What did we do? We went on, we how to clean a grill. I mean, it's a lot. And then I'm not even talking about Chat GPT. So I wanted something that talked about why you would seek certain people and seek certain work. What does, and it's that slow building wave. What does Roseanne Cash saying that she catches songs out of the air have to do with what I'm doing? Well, it turns out I've done a workshop with Roseanne Cash. She stitched a piece for the project. And I do think I catch quotes, and I love her music. And all of these people are just people that have been with me, or that I've admired, or both. And I wanted to make it accessible. I wanted it to give people a sense of the people who've inspired me. And then if they're interested, they can go looking for more information about these different artists, look at their projects, look at their work. I mean, if I added up all the books that these 25 contributors have written, or every movie they've been in, or every public project they've done, it's an enormous body of work. And so it's curating. It's curating and bringing them together, and thinking about creative ways to look at issues and challenges, and to feel empowered to take a creative approach, to look at what other people are doing and then take what works for you, and sort of leave the rest behind. I don't have a specific kit for anyone to, how to make a tiny bricks piece, but I can tell you why I make them and how I make them and why I love making them. And this book, I love this work. Each one of these contributors, I could spend weeks, looking at their photography, or with them, or walking with them, or, reviewing their work. So I feel like their work has been a gift to me, and this is a little gift back. That just, here are some people who are doing some really interesting, amazing things, and I think you might enjoy reading about them.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I like about it, is the fact it's quite easy when you're picking a book to make it kind of almost like to have one perspective, or to make it like your take on the subject. And you could have quite easily written a book about what craftivism is to you, but instead you've gone, what is craftivism to 26 people, yourself included, in 26 different arenas as well. So in the same ways, I quite like listening to music I've never heard before. This gives you an opportunity to read about craft and activism that you've never thought of before. Like, I'm quite interested now in furious vulvas, because they're made of chocolate, and I love the fact that there's a recipe in there for that. It may make 120 vulvas out of a single recipe if there's enough.
Very great for back to school night.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of potential there whatsoever. But I really just like the different approaches that there are there. I also did want to shout out Danielle Kreiser, because I love the idea of like literally making your own gallery. Just make a little gallery. Just take a shoebox, make a gallery, put some little art in it, and all that sort of thing, which I think is really empowering.
It is so empowering. It's a beautiful photo. Her work is amazing. Like you, she's had a podcast forever. I remember the time when I was in art school about 10 years ago, and I would listen to her podcast just thinking, someday, this amazing person who took a little idea, a feeling of being jealous of other people's artwork, and then, instead of being jealous of them, why don't I just embrace them and explore that feeling? So, she's from BC also, so we know BC towns. And when I saw the photo in the book of her little library against the snow, and I think there's a fence in the background, I thought, I know that snow. I know that's the snow of my childhood in northern British Columbia. So there's a way in which, I've written this book also to share, because this is craftivism to me. I mean, this is, it's including other people. I have been so lucky People like you have just looked at my work and said, yes, I'm interested. I'll help you. I have had so many people on Instagram and otherwise say, yeah, let's do this. And each one of these contributors, I mean, I went and spent a day with Giselle Fetterman and we made mosaic hearts. And yes, that's a craft. We're making mosaic hearts, but we're also telling the stories about the china that we're smashing. And she tells a story about a friend who brought her a cat that had been injured and gave her a little bowl for the cat's food. And the cat ended up, because she had nursed the cat back to health. The cat got a bigger bowl. What did she do? She took that little bowl and she smashed it and she made a mosaic heart out of it with little shards from the bowl. You see, it turns back. And that's craftivism to me, because you have a choice with every single object you have. Where do you put it and who do you give it to and what do you do with it? And so all of these contributors are doing something with what they have, whether they have a platform or they bake or they make chocolates, they take photos. It's so, to me, so beautiful. And so, it's like my favorite yearbook. It's like my favorite album, And I could have 3 of these. There were people that have books coming out themselves that I'd asked, or the timing was bad. The turnaround was very quick because we wanted to get it out at this moment because we didn't know how people would be feeling. How you don't know what's going to be happening. We had a pandemic. I still can't quite wrap my head around that. And when the pandemic hit, I thought the project was based on people getting together and doing workshops and being out and about. And I had a participant who was still doing pieces, and she said, and she was in her 70s, and she said, I'm waiting to go to the post office when it's not very crowded. And I thought, wait a minute, no, don't go to the post office. Don't mail in a piece. And so I changed the rules of the project to make it open to virtual submissions. So people could send me images because I wanted to keep it going. And that's the thing about craft, I think, is it's adaptive. Each of these contributors has had different challenges or different things they're addressing, and you adapt. And so watch other people adapt to things, then we can, I think we can do that ourselves.
Were there any noteworthy themes that you picked up from the conversations that you had? Things that just almost like everybody kind of said.
That's a really good question. And then you just I just suddenly had a fantasy of having everyone together in a panel, but to have them talk to each other one day. Are there any universal themes of craftivism of the contributors? That's really interesting. I think one of the things I realized is that a lot of craftivism starts with a personal question. Finding yourself in a situation. Jamie Lee Curtis writes about finding herself in a room and sort of having a moment of wondering, what am I going to say here? What am I doing here? So I think one of the things I found was a common thread was this uncomfortable, known, unknown position that people found themselves in. And they knew some things, but they didn't know everything. And they needed to somehow merge these two feelings. How can I do this? Like, something's happening. What can I do? If you're, Danielle's example that you used of creating your own mini museum. Well, you can't always go to a museum. You can have your own art gallery, and that's just a metaphor for creating something where you are, and putting something literally out there and letting go of it. So I think it's this known, unknown feeling that a lot of these people have had, and then they worked themselves into an answer. Tanya writes about during the pandemic starting to propagate plants and wondering, starting with one plant and caring for something that's living and keeping it alive, and gaining confidence of that process, and getting another plant. And what is that relationship to that plant when you've been through and come out of a traumatic experience. So it's this moment of a little discomfort, but that's the physically, excuse me, it's the doing something. Rochelle's is another example. You know, she's suffering, you know, going through postpartum depression, and she has this sudden idea, you know, pull over the car, go into Joann's, get some craft, you know, materials, you know, stitch something into a sweater. I mean, it's that impulse you had when you picked up your first cross stitch kit in the airport, airport gift shop. But yeah, it's a moment of discomfort and then working into comfort.
And then, to be equally annoying, were there any particularly unusual discoveries? Did somebody give you an idea that had like never occurred to you, but at the same time made perfect sense once they said it?
That's really interesting. Let me think for a minute. I mean, selfishly, I wanted to spend a little bit of time with each of these people. So I don't, you know, and I could spend a lot of time with them. One of the interviews that I started with Suleika Chouad, we had collaborated together in a series of posts when she was working toward clemency for Quentin Jones, who was on death row. And a lot of people become active in just sort of a campaign, a letter writing campaign, reaching out to the governor, you know, campaigning to grant clemency so that he could live out the rest of his life in prison, but not go to death row. And it's always been heavy for me that he was executed, you know, and so when I contacted her, I somehow felt I wanted to write about that story, about working together and stitching these pieces and working on that. And what she said to me was that she didn't have the same feeling of heaviness that I had, that we had somehow failed. And I was sort of talking about, like, I think I was thinking about when activism doesn't work, what do we do?
Yeah.
What do we do with ourselves? You know, I mean, you have to ride this wave of hope, and then does the wave have to crash and hit a wall, and you're kind of knocked out for a little bit? But she talked about in her piece how much love he felt, how much love Quentin Jones felt getting letters from people, and really talked about that love in the moment and the way in which he died. And I just thought of him dying by execution, death row, and she thought of him dying loved and feeling loved. And so it reminded me to not to construct such tight conclusions.
Yeah.
Not to tell a story that has this success, failure. Oh, we didn't do that. That didn't work out. And so I'm really grateful to Suleika for sort of sharing how she experienced that work. And that's a gift. And I think that's a good reminder.
Yeah.
Because, you know, reading this book, you know, craftivism does often have a point to it, something you're trying to achieve. And it's a long process, and the outcome may not be what you expect or hope for, but in the process, you may have gained something entirely different.
Yeah, I think that's probably a really important thing to take, isn't it? Because as you say, it's quite easy to go, well, I'm putting together a piece, you know, a project with this goal in mind, and you focus so long on the goal that you don't see the build up towards it, do you? You don't recognize that for each of those people who've done those letters, they've written their personal connection to somebody, haven't they? So there's however many hours of love and empathy that have gone into that, and that's quite a profound kind of experience on the whole, isn't it? Yeah, it's interesting how you measure it. I think that's a really interesting take on things. I always felt like that, even when I did the Christmas tree, or indeed when we did the Stitch for Syria project and we went over to Lebanon and we had these 2 wall hangings and they were just brightly coloured and you stuck them up on the wall. And it's just like, if you're able to, you can stop, as you did, as you said right at the start, you can stop and look at everything and suddenly tap into the time and energy put into it. And I can remember when they did the Christmas tree project and we had something like, we have like 600 baubles from around the world that people had stitched or something like that. And I got really emotional just talking about it, because I was just like, all I've said to people is come and stitch a cross stitch bauble. It's going to go on a tree so that people can enjoy Christmas and see all these things. And we had so many that they ended up being put all over the building and all kinds of things. But it was just like, you give people the opportunity to take part in their craft, and you say to them, this is the good intention that comes behind it, and then people respond to that, and that's like really moving, isn't it? Because there's so many people who have just been feeling a similar feeling and putting their time in, and you can sit and look at this and you can just, like with the wall hangings, just go, here's just a colourful outpouring of love that strangers around the world have chosen to do so that we can present it to these ladies in this kind of like sewing project in the middle of Beirut or whatever. It's just like, yeah, I think it's really interesting to not lose sight of that. I think you can lose sight of it, can't you? Even just on a day-to-day.
And the structure of these prescriptive projects don't always allow for the unknown, unlimited capacity of what you're offering. So, you had a number, you had a space, you had to pick a certain idea about your project to framework. There's no reason you couldn't have had 6,000 baubles. That's what I realized with Tiny Pricks, because the numbers got so big that, someone said I had a goal of 2,020 pieces by 2020. And then realized, like, why not more? Like, why not 20,000? Like, no, really, we don't think this way. We think this way with, a Taylor Swift concert, unlimited.
Yeah.
But who wouldn't want to do that? Your project. I mean, and it is. They do come together. These pieces do come together. Multiples do matter in these cases, because what they do is you can see the mass of humanity as opposed to an individual piece. And when you can do that, you're holding on to both the individual and the collective, which is just a beautiful. Maybe that's what it's like being at a Taylor Swift concert. I don't know. I have yet to have that experience, but I imagine that it's that thing, the individual, and then just everything, the eternity, the great unknown.
So has the end goal changed? Like you say, you've got, at this point, there's like 95 days till the election. Do you get a sense of the end of the tunnel, or is it going to evolve into something perpetual, or are you going to go, at a certain point, 12 months after the election, I'm going to go, right, I can't do these anymore. This is a time capsule now.
Oh yeah, the time capsule. That's the funny thing I realized is, it's hard to set a date, because I switched from dates to events, and they'll continue to be events. So at some point, yes. I mean, when do I sort of turn off the lights and say, my work here is done? I think when something else comes along that draws me in a different direction. I loved working on the book. I would love to do another book. I would love to do a book of Tiny Pricks project. I mean, they're specifically the pieces. The pieces are amazing. I would love to exhibit all 500 and whatever there will end up being in one place. Could that be possible? So I think something, bigger has to come along and pull me away from this thing that I already, love. But I will say, and I don't know if artists and craftivists are always good at this, but I am going to try to take some time off. It's so easy not to. I mean, clever me, I picked a medium that I could take anywhere, but the problem is I can take it anywhere.
Yeah.
And I don't need a kiln. I don't need a loom. It's just a little Ziploc bag. And I can do it everywhere. So I think I might take some time off at some point after this election and after the book is solidly launched and people have had a chance to read it and get to know it. But I don't know what's going to happen. And I do feel like at some point I would like to find a way to really address the climate crisis. And I haven't, that one doesn't have words exactly to it. And because I work with text and language, it's been hard to get those words.
Sounds like you've somewhere at the back of your head, you've pressed a finger on a keyboard. You've gone dung, but now you need the other fingers, don't you? You got to like the slow build up of places. How does it go? Emotions, experiences, outside influences, well, that sort of thing. So, okay.
I do.
I'm going to go on to the really difficult questions. Now we've covered all the really easy stuff, like, you know, creative journey as a curator and all those sorts of things. The big questions now. Do you have a favorite album then? Possibly not.
When I grew up in the wilderness, we didn't have electricity or indoor plumbing, but my parents had a little tape recorder.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Sorry, is that going to be the interesting fact that not a lot of people know about you? Because you can't just casually go,
I think everybody knows.
When I grew up in the wilderness and we didn't have electricity or running water.
I think everybody knows that about me. I think I have wilderness child written all over me, but that could be the interesting fact. But my parents had these cassette tapes, and I can just remember every detail of them because when you only had 3 cassette tapes forever, 7 years, it was Tony Orlando and Dawn,
right,
with Yellow Ribbon Around the Old Oak Tree, and I mean, that song, I spent much of my early childhood trying to imagine what that song meant, and just that moment when he finds the yellow ribbon around the old oak tree, and I just could relive it in my imagination over and over again. The other cassette tape was Judy Collins' Colors of the Day, and the third one was the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. So I don't know if those are my favorites, but when I hear them, it is a complete body experience. And right now, I have not actually re-listened to those 3, not by cassette, but albums, because my father passed away almost 2 years ago, and I can't quite. So it is so powerful. So I don't know if they're my favorites, but I think they hold the most memories for me, and that's really, for me, what music is about. It's so much fun to draw upon songs of all the music I use in the project is music I used to listen to. So you have the Barbie movie, you have Pretty in Pink, you can pull back those songs that you listen to in different movies and things like that. But those 3 are very powerful. And then right now I'm not, maybe on my vacation.
Probably need some Taylor Swift by the sounds of it. Do you listen to music while you're working? I feel like your work is so instantaneous that it might be you could have music on, you could not have music on, it would largely be irrelevant because you're just banging that phrase out and it's just coming out of you.
So I don't listen to a lot of music when I work. I collaborate with Molly Jong Fast a lot, so I listen to her podcast. I listen to The Daily. I'm catching up on the news, so unfortunately it's mostly news podcasts, Pod Save America. And in part because if I'm going to post about the news, I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to benefit from people who've already talked about this specific issue or topic or quote, and can give me some information about it. And then I also just sit in silence.
Because you're a wilderness child, apparently, and that's all there was.
Because you want to conserve the electricity just in case you want to remember how to live without electricity.
Just listening out for the sound of a beaver going at a tree in the distance.
Sometimes there's music all the time. I mean, I don't know. Family members get in the car. What immediately put on music? Immediately. And sometimes I just want to listen to nothing.
Yeah. Get a space for your own thoughts, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and to be able to do that and then go back to something, but mostly news podcasts.
What do you have a favorite book, or what was the last good book you read?
The last amazing book I read is Claire Massoud's This Strange Eventful History. And she uses family letters and photographs, and she tells the story of 3 generations of her family. I think it's 7 different countries and over decades. And the way she's written it, I don't want to say too much about it, but the way this strange eventful history is written is that you are in the middle of the book, and the structure is not mysterious in so much as it doesn't explain itself to you immediately. And so you have to surrender, as you should, if you're going to be taken to a book like this, which is a story of a family and their disappointments, their successes, their connection, their disconnection, and what it means to, I think, be a family that lives in different places, that because each place is a culture, is a politics, is a way of living. And as somebody whose parents left the US when I was a year old to move to Canada, I grew up in Canada, but I was American and they were American. So I was hearing about all of these American traditions in another country. And so this idea of, can we go home? Where is home? How do we build a home? You have to surrender, I think. And so Claire's book is a really amazing reminder of fiction as a trip, as a journey, as a way of letting go of where you think you are and allowing yourself to go into a book. And I know, and I think it's different to read it than to listen to books. I know a lot of people listen to books now, but I think physically holding the book and even a voice gives you some feeling of meaning. Just to see the words. The words are not, they're just words, flat words. They're not stitch words like my words where I can express something. There's a font, there's a page, there's the size of the book, but still you meet each other in a different place. So I can't recommend this strange eventful history more strongly.
I've got shall we call it a wifeful birthday on the horizon, and that sounds very much like the right kind of book that she'd enjoy reading, because when she gets a good book, it's super annoying because she'll just come home from work and go and sit out in the garden for like 45 minutes reading, and I'm like, oh mate, doing it for the kids then. But like when she's in it, it's just so nice to see.
This is a book, your bathwater will get cold.
Excellent.
And I will say that it's a really it's a good reminder of what it means to have different generations, to be connected to different generations. We connect in all these other communities, but how do we remember to connect to our parents, our grandparents, our children? And what's that sort of vertical thread that goes through the generations? So it's not instructive. She's not meaning to be instructive, but it is. What do people in your family remember about you? How you spoke to them, how you interacted to them, what gift you gave them, how you made them feel about who they were, what you said to each other. So it's a beautiful book.
Yeah, I like it. I like the sound of that. Television/film. I seem to have lost the ability to structure my sentences now, so I'm just going to use broad nouns. Television/film. Do you have a favorite film?
Well, I think my favorite film of all time is The Sound of Music. And again, because my father's passed and I'm processing a lot of my experiences with him, when we eventually left the wilderness, I could see movies. I remember my father saying, we're going to go see this movie called The Sound of Music. And given what I knew at that point of my father, I was very sure that I was going to go see a movie about musical instruments.
Okay, right.
And I was pretty bummed, to say the least. I was not interested. I was there for the popcorn and that was it. And then, of course, we went to see The Sound of Music. And I was just like, wow, I mean, Technicolor. So now when I think about the movie, I still think about them, making clothing out of the drapes and hiking through mountains and, the different things. So I think that movie, just because of that memory, with my father, and that expectation and just the pure joy of seeing something that you did not expect to see. My mind was blown. And there have been movies since. I think Parasite was pretty good. My mind was definitely blown. Anatomy of the Fall. I mean, any movie that really, I don't want to see trailers. I don't want to read reviews. Just surprise me.
I've not watched Anatomy of the Fall yet because it's subtitled and therefore is cross-stitch incompatible.
Yes, I do know that, and I have once my family members told me that we could not have the lights on so I could see and stitch, so I had to wear a headlamp. I think
Okay.
it was actually Apocalypse Now because that's really important to see sort of in the dark. I had my headlamp like this stitching. Yeah, you know, Anatomy of Fall is not a great date movie. Um, but it's really good. So
Did you
yeah,
like the
those are some
Barbie
of
movie?
I'm not sure if you're bringing that up because you're giving me a freebie, but my story is that in 1994, my best friend from high school and I drove across the country in the US shooting a movie with Barbie dolls on Super 8 film. I'm not kidding. We had over 200 Barbie dolls. We had Elvis, Donnie Marie, Mr. T, Dolly Parton, and then Barbie, of course, and a lot of Kens, and Cher. We had Sonny and Cher, both dolls. And my friend had written a script about the life of Barbie. And in her movie, Barbie grew up in a small town, moved to LA, became a rock star, got very lost, as one does, and was on a spiritual journey to find herself again. So this is like 30 years ago. We shot it in Super 8,
That's amazing.
drove across the country. She cut it. She showed it at a few festivals. That was it. So when the Barbie movie came out, I was like, oh my goodness. Oh my, I couldn't believe it. What did I think about it? Yeah, great. I think it's great when we can, I think communal experiences are great. It used to be that we would all see the same movies every summer and we would talk about them. So I think the fact that so many people saw it is great. I like Greta Gerwig. I think, let's have the conversation. Let's see it. Let's enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of high stakes, wasn't it? It could have been dreadful, but she really pulled it off. Me and Mary went to see it. Mary fell asleep about 5 minutes towards the end. You know, like the misty bit where it's all like the whole point of it is kind of revealed and all of that. And Mary missed that because she'd fallen asleep by that point. So I'm so glad we did that. But
well, and also I think there was this story about Greta Gerwig using up all the paint of that color. So just on a creative perspective.
Yeah. In the UK as well, because it was filmed over here. You couldn't get that pink at all.
Materials.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and dressing up to go to a movie. I think things are good. They're creative. I think.
To be honest, I was one of the only like non-Barbie pink people at the cinema at that time. But I think that was fair because I think I would have looked a touch like it would have been a bit contrived if I'd have done it. That's not to say I don't embrace the spirit of it.
I wonder if you would have felt differently seeing it if you had been dressed in pink.
It's true. Maybe I'll do it at home, just see if it resonates any differently with me. Right, one more. Is there an interesting fact, we've already had several, that not a lot of people know about you? I mean, you've already given me, we made our own Barbie movie and drove across the States and had 200 Barbies. That's a fact in and of itself. And then there's the wilderness era. I mean...
the wilderness era. That is a really good question. I think that I'm actually an introvert, and I think that people think if you're on social media, you're an extrovert. So if you're talking about like what do people know about me relative to this project and this work, or don't know, I think it's that I'm relatively quiet and introverted, and that this platform and this work has given me a chance to be less so.
Was there a tipping point where you were like, oh God, oh my goodness, yeah,
Well, I remember during the pandemic, I had, as we all were, I hadn't gone to see my GP and I hadn't done a follow-up breast exam. And I was in the shower and I found something that was kind of alarming. So I was able to go in and see my GP. And she said, I'm going to schedule a mammogram and ultrasound. I was like, oh, this does not sound good. And of course, to sort of intellectualize the situation, I thought, oh, this is interesting. The things that we don't schedule in the middle of a pandemic, of course, and what happens to this kind of care and maintenance that we need. So I was able to get an appointment, but quite a bit of time later, enough time to worry and think and constantly look for that spot as one does. And I thought, oh, if I'm doing this, this is being more extroverted. If I'm doing this, then surely other people are also not getting mammograms. So maybe I should say something because I just did this thing. And I discussed it with my daughters, and I decided to post and say, this is tomorrow, I have this appointment, and this is a reminder to continue to take care of yourself and check things out in middle of this in middle of the pandemic. And at that point, there was sort of pressure on Instagram to have more engagement. And my daughters were talking to me about engagement and making reels and things like that. And I was like, but this lump. And so once I did share this thing, and the response was, I still feel kind of emotional talking about it, was really overwhelming and generous and caring. And I said to my daughters, like, I can't answer all these messages the way I would like to. And they're like, Mom, this is engagement. It's called engaging because you engage. And I was like, oh, that's true. And it was a very touching moment because people offered to help me. They offered someone said to me, I don't sleep very well right now. If you need to call someone in the middle of the night, you can call me. So I came out, and there were so many other women who were going through the same experience, like people who literally had appointments the same day I did. And then, of course, I felt after my appointment, after I got the results, which thankfully were benign, I should share the results because people were concerned about me. And that was when I really realized this is like, figure out how introverted, extroverted you are, because I didn't want to draw attention to my situation exactly unless it would help others sort of not be as sort of, neglect their care the way I had. So that was where I sort of felt like I can't respond in the way I would like to, because this is so big, and I would want to respond to every comment and every offer and every expression of care.
Do you find that there's a coping strategy is the wrong word, right? But I take solace in the fact that I'm both Jamie Chalmers and Mr. X Stitch, and in many ways they're very different people. And I think you probably have a similar option there, don't you? There's Diana the person, and then there's Tiny Pix project, and you as a curator of that. But there is a gap, and so that gap allows for a bit of like security, I think.
I think mostly there's Tiny Pix. I was once on a Zoom call, and I wasn't allowed out of the green room, and I was getting kind of nervous to join the Zoom call. It was quite a few people. And someone finally said, oh, after they let me in, they later apologized. They said, oh, I didn't know your name.
Nice.
I saw you in the green room and I didn't let you in. I feel very lucky that both exists. And yes, there is a difference, but really, if you know me, that Tiny Pix is sort of, that's what was so enjoyable about the book, is that's just who I am. Like, so it is who I am. It's not everything, but it's a lot. And so, yeah, I feel they're very connected. I just, they work in different places and have different jobs.
The Tiny Pix would be your street fighting name if push came to shove.
It does confuse people. Once I had a show in San Francisco, near I don't know if it's called the Porn District, but wherever there are the sort of the adult clubs, and a couple came in. We have a show called Tiny Pix Project, and they came in expecting something different, and I was like, no, it's about embroidery. So yeah, it's an interesting title, but it's stuck, and I always think of it as sort of to prick your conscience. That was sort of, and then the stitching, and I'm not as interested in the reference to anatomy, but there are a lot of different meanings.
I think it works perfectly.
Yeah.
And long may it continue to work perfectly as well, quite frankly.
So. Thank you.
Hey, Diana, thanks for having a NeedleXChange with me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's been a blast.